Tonight on Free Minds TV, Ron Paul 2012 looks like it's going to become a reality. We'll also be discussing Ben Bernanke's first ever Fed press conference, a Rhode Island state representative being charged with drug possession, among other things, plus prostate cancer. That plus a whole lot more coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
Thank you very much for tuning in to episode 202 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. As always, it's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
We've got a lot to talk about today. We're going to be talking about Mr. Bernanke and Bernanke and the economy. Some very exciting stuff going on there, I'm sure, as well as prostate cancer and some new studies in the news about what kind of trans fats or omega-3 fatty acids you should be eating, as well as a story about one, well, just looks like a corrupt rep, but I'm not too surprised about that coming from Rhode Island. But first, Nick, I mean, when we first started Free Minds TV, one of the most prevalent topics that showed up on the show was Ron Paul, because right around the first couple of years when we got on the air, he was the only candidate out there that on the federal level that was talking about smaller government issues, and we kind of got behind him. And
well, he's still one of the very few credible politicians.
We chased him around the state. We chased him around the state in 2007, 2008.
Yeah, that was the 2008 presidential election. So yeah, we were chasing him around for the primary.
That was a lot of fun, and then of course he lost dismally. He got a few percentage points in the polls, but you know, people like their big government. But this time around, he thinks he has a better shot for it. He just announced recently that he will be running again into the 2012 elections. So are we going to chase him around the state and pump him up quite as much as we did last time? Well, probably not, because as if you've watched the last couple episodes of Free Minds TV, it's kind of given up on the federal government in general.
Largely, but I still I mean, the Ron Paul campaign did a lot to talk about the ideas of freedom and liberty.
And that's what I think is still very important.
And I mean, there is still a federal government out there, and probably will be for quite some time. So you might as well vote in federal elections. I just don't know how much say you're going to have. But the Ron Paul campaign was one worthwhile federal event to take place in the last.
Well, vote or not,
I've been involved in politics.
Vote or not, I think that campaigning behind a candidate such as Ron Paul can really educate a lot of people about the ideals of freedom, liberty, and smaller government as possible. I mean, millions and millions of people who had never been taught about some of the principles about the Constitution, who had never really thought about getting rid of this huge standing military and bringing the troops home from not only Iraq, Afghanistan, but all the countries that we're occupying, who had never really thought about what the Federal Reserve is and what a fiat currency is. I mean, Ron Paul's been talking about these subjects for 20-odd years plus, but it wasn't until the last presidential elections that he started to get news coverage and started telling people about these ideas. And I think that that alone has done quite a bit.
Well, I think it's done a lot more than most people in the mainstream give him credit for right now. I mean, it's hard to tell exactly what amount of it is due to Ron Paul, but certainly the Federal Reserve is under a lot more scrutiny. The monetary system is under a lot more scrutiny. And Ron Paul, at least, he gets a lot of airplay on networks like CNBC, Fox. He gets a lot of credibility with, I don't know, people who follow financial matters and economic matters, because he was the only candidate out there during the primary in leading up to 2008 where he was saying that there was a financial crisis coming in the U.S., and he has called everything pretty darn right. And you could say, you know, a broken clock is right twice a day. He's been saying it for a long time, but, you know, he's predicted everything about this crisis pretty accurately. I think you have to give him some credit, and I think you have to give some credit to Ron Paul for the pushback that there has been. Not that it's been very successful, but throughout the bailouts, throughout quantitative easing round 1 and quantitative easing round 2, we've seen people in the so-called Tea Party movement, very imperfect. Don't think a lot of them are terribly principled, but at least they're pushing back against a lot of these programs, the enlargement of the state. They push back against the healthcare legislation. All good things. I think many of them are pushing back for political reasons, for the wrong reasons. They're pushing back simply because there are Democrats proposing these plans right now. But nevertheless, I think the Ron Paul campaign bringing a lot of those ideas into the mainstream I think it's given a little bit more power to the what's kind of the opposition, to the Republicans in this case. And not that I think they're going to do anything in the long run to turn the country around as a party, but they certainly have pushed back against some of these programs, Toby. So I think it's important to give them some credit. I don't think the Federal Reserve would be under nearly as much scrutiny and nearly as much pressure as it is right now had Ron Paul not run for president.
Sure. And as I said, I mean, I don't think that he's going to win. I don't think anyone really thinks he's going to be the next president. Even if he did, I mean, he's only one guy with this behemoth of a government. But I do believe that he can definitely get some ideas out there. And so we'll continue to follow. It'll be interesting. Last time he ran, he was really good at raising money really quickly. I mean, he raised over $6 million in just one day. This time, he's one of the first presidential candidates that's really thrown his hat into the race. And so will he fare a little bit better? I don't know. His poll numbers are still somewhere around 5% or something. Very low. Still a very fringe candidate, but definitely something that's interesting to watch as you know, this whole show of theater that's going to be taking place the next couple of years on the federal level, and that's really what it is.
I still doubt he's going to win. Like I've given up on the idea that we're going to reform Washington through the political process.
Yeah.
Not that I'm not going to take part in the campaign. I guess it's still worth a shot, and it gets the ideas discussed.
That education piece, I think, is huge. I mean, he's on a national stage and reaching. Really, it's almost an international stage because you have people watching from all around the world.
The foreign press picked up on the Ron Paul campaign to a great extent more than the American press.
Right. So I think that getting behind someone like him can do huge things for the liberty movement. And I mean, even if he's not 100% principled for your anarchists out there, well, guess what? He's still planting seeds and ideas that otherwise, well, just wouldn't be getting out there.
Yeah. I mean, and the education is vital because you know, the reason that I've largely given up hope on reforming the federal government isn't because it could not be done. It's actually because the American people as a whole just simply don't seem to want to do that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just last week we reported on how many Americans you want higher taxes, not necessarily for yourselves, but for the rich, and you want to keep all these services around. Most Americans, maybe not most of you in whatever town you're watching in, want to keep the military as large as it is. You don't want any cuts. No cuts to Medicare or Medicaid. I mean, we're just not going to cut anything. We're going to raise taxes. So largely, you know, what people in the liberty movement have been saying about having a large federal government has been true. We're going to have far bigger debt, far less prosperity, higher taxes, just less freedom. We're going to have a less free United States. That's unless something major changes. That's the trend. That's the course we're on. So unless there's a major change, I don't think that we're going to have anything but a bigger, more intrusive government. The only way to get massive change is to do things like educate people, change some minds. And I think that Ron Paul running again could do that even more effectively this time around than it did last time.
Yeah, he doesn't have to build up that name recognition he did back in 2007. Anyway, speaking of some of the issues Ron Paul talks a lot about, I mean, one of the ones on the forefront is monetary policy and inflation. And it looks like, well, we're going to be staying on that same old track lately, aren't we?
Yes. Thankfully, I guess they're not going for the drop the money from helicopter strategy. They're not going completely insane.
I'd like that because at least I'd get a couple of those dollars. And I could catch some of the dollars.
They're also not going with quantitative easing round 3. At least that's what Bernanke's saying right now. Bernanke delivered the first ever press conference that was delivered by a Federal Reserve chairman. I mean, these guys typically do not speak to the American people or to the press even, really. Usually the only time previous to this that we would see a Fed chairman speak was in Congress when he's being questioned by a finance committee or if he's being called before the full House for some kind of testimony. Up until now, this has never happened. This is unprecedented. And I think one of the reasons that it is happening is because we've seen so much scrutiny of the Federal Reserve. We've seen gold prices exploding, silver prices exploding, oil prices have been on the rise. There's a lot of concern, not just on Wall Street, but also now trickling down to Main Street, that inflation is going to be a real problem. And so, this press conference is designed to reassure the American people. It makes me wonder why an unprecedented press conference is being held. I mean,
well,
Bernanke obviously felt that there was something that called for some kind of drastic measure. I don't think he was just had nothing to do today.
He's bored today, so he decided to go on TV for an hour. I think that what's interesting is it was meant to make people more confident, but immediately after it was over, you saw silver and gold go shooting up again.
Yeah, I mean
so how confident did it make people? How well did it work?
And I mean, you have to remember, we've talked about how gold and silver hold their value against inflation. I think it's important to point out that they have run up so much so fast. If you don't follow the metals, I mean,
scary high.
Yeah, I mean,
it went up like $3 just today.
It wasn't that long ago that silver was like trading about 20. Now it's trading just a hair under 50, and that's the spot price. That's the bulk price. That's not where you're going to be paying over $50 for a coin.
50, 55 on eBay.
Yeah. I mean, so. Could there be a bubble there? There certainly could, because there's investment taking place, there's speculation taking place. Then again, it could double from here. Who knows? We don't give investment advice, but it's hard to say. So yes, gold and silver do hedge for inflation long term. Short term, they're very volatile, and you can do a lot of reading on that. I think Adam Smith actually talks about the volatility. Silver is a good measure from one century to another. It's not a good century from. No, I'm sorry. That's the opposite. Corn's a good measure from century to century. Silver's a good measure day to day, if it's in currency, which it's not. Anyway, I'm boring you. But what Bernanke said certainly didn't reassure markets, as you pointed out, Toby. Gold up over $25, silver up over $3 in a day. Oil hit $113. I would expect that's going higher. Because remember, all these commodities traded in terms of US dollars. US dollars not backed by anything but the faith and credit people have in them. And what quantitative easing is basically when you're easing on monetary policy, you're essentially creating money. You're making the flow of money happen much faster, much more easily. That's why interest rates are so low. It's very cheap to borrow money, print new money, and borrow new money into existence. So that's what they're encouraging here. And some people are saying, well, there's just a commodities bubble. You can't look at these things. The euro, with all the problems that Europe is having, with Ireland, Greece, Spain, I mean, they're in the middle of a crisis. There's very real speculation. There's it's a minority viewpoint, but it's an outside possibility that there will be a threat to the existence of the Eurozone over the next several years because of the unfolding financial crisis and the strains it's putting on the euro, on the European Union. But the euro is still rising against the US dollar, and the euro is a currency in crisis. So that's I think it's setting record highs at this point today because of this speech. Markets are up at the same time that oil is up. That normally doesn't happen. High oil prices are usually bad for the stock market. Why would they both go up at once? It's usually a classic sign that people are trying to buy anything that's not US dollars. Oil's going to hedge for inflation. Stocks, to an extent, might hedge for inflation. Gold, silver certainly will. So people are trying to take their money out of US dollars, Toby, put them into commodities, stocks, things that will grow as the dollar devalues. If you've got money sitting in a savings account, even according to Ben Bernanke, who says inflation is not an issue, the market obviously doesn't believe him, but even if you believe him, we're talking about a 2% rate of inflation. That doesn't sound bad, but if you've got money saved at, 0.2%? That's what I get in my savings account. That's nothing. The rate of inflation is 10 times the rate of yield you're getting. You're not even saving your money. You're losing money by keeping it in a savings account right now in real terms in your purchasing power.
Yeah, he didn't make me feel very confident. But then again, I'm starting to prepare myself to give up on the dollar altogether, Nick. I mean, it's not doing very well.
Remember, this is a long-term thing.
It'll be slow, yes.
And the inflation fears are priced in here. So, the market's been worried about inflation for months now, years. The last couple of years has been a concern. So, it doesn't necessarily mean
won't be overnight.
Prices are going to keep going up and up and up. Right now, the rate of inflation seems modest, although I don't think it's as low as the Fed's saying. And I think long term, there's definitely a threat to the dollar.
It all depends how you calculate what inflation is. I mean, electronics, have they always been going down? Yeah, you can buy cheaper TVs and cheaper computers.
Right. They count those, but they don't count food and energy, which I'm sure none of you buy.
You can't eat a TV.
Or housing.
You can't eat a computer.
Yeah. No, I mean, rent prices are way up. Fuel prices are way up. This isn't just, there's other stuff influencing it besides monetary policy. I understand that. But fuel, housing, food, up.
The ones that matter.
They're not counted in the official inflation figures, but think about how much money people spend on food, housing, and fuel to get around and heat themselves.
That's 75% of my paycheck at least.
Yeah, so I mean, what are we talking? We're talking about inflation with our discretionary spending on cheap junk from China. Is that what we're talking about?
Yay.
Yeah, I mean, come on. How helpful is that?
All right, let's bring it back here. Enough of the doom and gloom out there. This is real slow, and monetary policy and my eyes start to glaze over after about 5 minutes. 2 minutes. So let's move on to the more exciting stuff. Some of this people, the hypocrites, the sanctimonious people in Washington. Let's move on to them. You've got one about...
Oh, actually, sanctimonious people in Providence.
Oh, Providence. I'm sorry.
Providence. We're going down to Rhode Island. This is a Rhode Island state rep.
Oh, I thought he was a rep. Okay, sorry.
No,
all right.
It's okay. Well,
not my story.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me either way. But this coming out of the state of Rhode Island. Republican State Representative Robert Watson is being charged with driving under the influence of marijuana and possession of marijuana and paraphernalia. Now, this is coming from a guy who back in February said the following. He said that, according to the Raw story, who's doing the initial reporting here, Watson said that the Rhode Island state legislature had its priorities right, quote, if you are a Guatemalan gay man who likes to smoke marijuana.
What did he mean by that, Nick?
He means, he means that the state legislators in Providence, Rhode Island, are only concerned with illegal immigrants, although I'm sure there are some Guatemalans out there who moved here legally, gay people, and marijuana.
Well, it
legalization.
Seems like, well, so, yeah, it seems it's still illegal and he got busted for it.
Yeah,
so, I mean, I'm not a fan of the drug war, Nick, but you know who I do. I gloat a little bit when they're arrested is the warriors themselves. When a drug warrior falls victim to their own policy.
Well, what was meant by this statement, as inflammatory and offensive as it was I guess he was on a radio show and he was talking. His point was, besides the fact that he doesn't really like Guatemalans, gays, or pot smokers, publicly anyway, because apparently he is a pot smoker. He may also be gay. He didn't look Guatemalan to me.
You never know.
Watson doesn't sound Guatemalan. You never know. Maybe his gay lover is Guatemalan. Not saying he has one. Who knows? But
speculating.
But yeah, what he was trying to say was that they should focus on economic issues, and you know, if Republicans want to try to play fiscal conservatives, the way to do it is not to talk about immigrants, gays, and pot, because these are kind of the losing issues for Republicans, not only in my book, but I think for the country more generally, especially going forward. Marijuana legalization is coming. I mean, I think that's just a point of fact. And it's strange for me to say that because 5 years ago, Toby, you know, even as somebody who's been hoping that that would happen, 5 years ago is a much different picture, but I think the viewpoint of the general public is changing so fast. I'm almost positive that, you know, 20 years from now, marijuana might not be fully legal, but it's not going to be it's not going to be a big criminal offense or a big deal if you're an adult and you get caught with marijuana. Maybe it'll be a $50 fine. But that's coming. Hating on immigrants, hating on Hispanics especially. Republicans better realize they're going to be one of the biggest voting groups here in the U.S. pretty soon. They're a big voting group already. Many of them are legal. There are a lot of Hispanics who are U.S. citizens. And, you know, gays,
the
come
gay
on,
thing
guys.
just makes you sound like a bigot. I mean,
yeah.
Just straight up.
Just very old school. Just add a touch, like.
Why don't we go after the blacks while we're at it?
Yeah, like, let's just we're bringing it back. Get my sheets and my cross. We're bringing it back. I mean, come on.
Seriously, that's what it sounds like to me. Maybe.
Oh, that's what it should. I mean, that is what motivates it. I know some people out there have religious
I don't care.
Yeah,
There's
I
plenty
don't
of
care
religions
either.
out there that
I don't agree with it either.
Nick.
I mean, some people will say, hey, it's different because being gay is a choice and blah, 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 which, yeah, it really probably isn't if you've met many gay people.
I guess black people could bleach their skin, Nick.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, so I think it's time for the Republicans to move past these social issues because
in all people, how about just people in general? Move on from your hatred and your bigotry. Grow up. I mean, it's childish and it's still around and it's still so prevalent and moves throughout systems. So many of the policies that are out there discriminate. They're racist. I mean, they're classist. It's amazing that in this day and age, the year 2011, the policies and systems that are in place in this country
are as
bigoted as they are still.
Well, it's because the policymakers have always used class divisions, race divisions. Now, more recently, now there's not as much of a religious issue and people are out about it, sexual orientation as a wedge issue. So they try to split groups up, this identity politics thing. I mean, both sides do it, even ones who say they're on your side. If you're a gun owner, the Republicans say that they're on your side, and they try to get you to support other policies you don't like, just so you can have a little bit of your freedom in respects to you being a gun owner. If you're gay, that would probably be the Democrats on, say, the gay marriage issue or something like that. And they'll try to say, get you to say, well, you got to be on our side because you're gay, and that's just...
Where else are you going to go?
Right, you got to fall into our camp, even though we support all these other policies.
What if you're a gay gun owner?
They're destructive to your... See, they exist. Pink pistols exist. There is a gay pro-gun group. Once you start getting into those overlaps between the traditional right-wing and left-wing constituencies, you start finding a lot of libertarians in there. I think a lot of the pink pistols are probably libertarians.
Yeah, well, you can't... Because where else are you going to go? I mean, you got to...
Right. Marijuana smokers for tax reform, they're not real, but I mean, I'm sure there's a group like that out there. I mean, once you start getting on those issues where people just generally want to be free and they're not taking the left-right side, then you start talking about people that I can sit down and have a discussion with, because freedom's kind of the objective, not identity politics, saying I'm this or I'm that, because honestly, you're just one person. There's a lot of gay people. You've got disparate interests, different beliefs, all of that.
It just boggles my mind, Nick, I guess.
Viewing yourself in terms of race or orientation or religion is just silly.
The way in which the American people allow themselves to just be tricked by some politician on TV, it is pretty impressive. It doesn't really say a lot for the American people.
Well, it's not just the American. I mean,
it's all people, I guess.
It's all people, but I mean,
this is our tendency.
And it's a little bit harder now because the lies, I think, are a little bit more polished, and it's a little bit easier to fool people. I mean, we've got a 24-hour news cycle. Back in the day, you didn't have plastic surgery. These politicians, in many cases, they didn't have access to research teams. They didn't, have a camera crew to set up for them, make them look nice. And I feel like people think that if it's coming to them from the other side of a TV screen, it's more credible. Whereas back in the day, when you went to see somebody like, I don't know, Teddy Roosevelt speak, I mean, you got to see, that there were no edits. There was nothing like that. You get to hear his speech impediment. Get to
True, but
see how he hadn't shaved in a few days.
That's like saying we've only started going towards a big oppressive government and people who are only tricked recently. But it's just as bad. We like to go back and be like, oh, the good old Ronald Reagan days.
Well,
no, he was a big government guy. I mean, it's been prevalent throughout history. The founding fathers were slave owners. I mean, you had...
Some of the founding fathers were slave owners.
Sure.
The Adamses weren't. The ones from Massachusetts and New York weren't.
Okay, but you get the point, right? That we like to
There's always,
put these people up on a pedestal and say, well, if we could only go back to the good old days where only white landowners could vote, is that what we're going for?
Right.
I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I do it as well.
Right, yeah, you do have it. There is a tendency to idealize the time of the founding. I think the founding, if you look at the founding of the U.S. in a historical context, for their time, they were very, very progressive, very much into liberty and freedom. At the time, it was understood to mean that only applied to people of basically Anglo-Saxon descent who were Protestants who owned land. It was pretty, it was pretty repressive. So it's never been perfect. And I think that's what people have to remember, is there is no golden age to look back to. And in reality, there's no perfect golden age to look forward to. You can make progress towards it. If I didn't believe that, we wouldn't do this show. I've got other things I could be doing. But you're never going to have a perfect society. And even people who are really, for the most part, really good advocates for freedom and liberty, they probably have their own shortcomings. People are just people. The best politician out there, even Ron Paul, he's just a human. I'm sure he's made mistakes.
I'm sure he's not I don't agree with all his policies.
He's about as close as you can get to a truly ethical, principled politician. I'm sure he's made a mistake or two in his life.
Lots of them.
So just remember, politicians are just people. Don't idealize them. Don't worship them. They're not demigods. They're just people. They've got all the same flaws that people, working in a warehouse have. They've got the same personality types just about anywhere you go in life. Just because somebody's got a lot of money and a lot of influence doesn't mean they're anything special. Doesn't mean they're some kind of master race, the people who go to Washington. They're just people. And in many cases, they're some of the scummiest people in the world.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
They've just lied and tricked their way to the top, and
I'd rather hang out with the warehouse worker.
Yeah, they've managed to screw enough people in business deals to get enough money to professionally spin and lie to people. I mean, that's what you're dealing with a lot of the time with this upper crust, top tier of the elite in the world of business and politics. You're dealing with really the scum of the earth, but they're in charge. They're worse than some of the gangsters or the hood rats you'll see on the street selling crack. I mean, honestly, not all of them. I'm not trying to overdo it here, but really, some of them are just much more calculated, much more successful criminals.
Yeah, it's interesting. The political arena is a perfect place for a sociopath, if they can get away with it. Anyways, Nick, I do want to talk about one area that I've been tricked recently. Speaking of tricks, it happens to me every single day. I read a news story and go, oh, that sounds good for me. I agree with that. Coffee's good for me today. It prevents Alzheimer's. Make me another cup. And so that's my own cognitive dissonance going in there. I pick out the news stories that work out for me. So I guess I'm just as guilty as you people out there that are being tricked by the Republicans and Democrats, saying that they're the ones to side with. So don't want to make it out to that. I don't get tricked as well. I've been tricked, Nick. I've been tricked into eating a whole bunch of omega-3 fatty acids because I've been told it was so good for me. And then I am clicking on the Yahoo News yesterday, and it looks like high levels of heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids in the blood may be associated with an increased risk for developing aggressive prostate cancer. Oh dear, the sky is falling. I've been eating lots of them for well over a year now, ever since I read a story saying how good for me they are, and how I need to be getting away from these trans fatty acids, which in fact may lower the risk of the aggressive prostate cancer. What am I to do?
Well, that's the thing, is everything's good for you in some respects and not in others.
It's complicated.
Too much water, you really have to overdo it. Too much water can be bad for you. I mean, there's downsides to everything. And the thing this story doesn't address is really doing the cost-benefit. I mean, I guess it would probably depend on the individual, because some people have a really increased risk for prostate cancer. Maybe, I'm not going to recommend eating trans fats, because I still think it's a really bad idea. But maybe you shouldn't be taking omega-3 fatty acid supplements. I mean, it's just one study. But, you have to make these decisions in life. Nothing's perfect. If you're somebody with, my understanding is that omega-3 is good for your heart.
Yeah, that's what they say.
So if you've got a history of heart disease in your family but not prostate cancer, you're probably okay taking the omega-3.
So, but if you have the prostate, do you eat the trans fats instead?
No, I wouldn't recommend eating trans fats. Maybe just don't eat any supplemental fats in your diet.
No fats in my diet.
No,
that's
just
what I live on.
Well, there's different fats, but trans fats and omega-3 fatty acids.
I like all the fats.
Yeah, well, eat dairy. Oh. Dairy's fine. There's no trans fats. There might be some omega-3s.
Dairy like the cow hamburgers, right? That's the kind of dairy I like.
I meant like cheese.
Oh, yeah, well, I like cheese on my hamburgers, so I guess I'm good there. But I guess what it comes down to is don't believe everything you read. There's always complications in everything. And don't believe everything we say, because we're just people as well. So put that out there. Send us your mail, fmtv@freeminds.com. TV.com is the address, or freemindstv.com. You can log on there. There's contact info, ways to help out the show, the radio show, and so much more. The show content up on our forums, all at freemindstv.com. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good one.